What if the very thing you're pushing for is actually running from you because you're pushing too hard? There's a wild paradox to life that most people don't discover until they burn themselves out trying. It's this: the moment you stop chasing with clenched fists the things you once longed for: success, love, peace, clarity start to find you. They drift into your life not with a bang, but like a breeze on a quiet evening, unexpected, effortless, natural. It's not some mystical force or random stroke of luck. No, this is the hidden current beneath all things, the flow of energy that responds to your inner state more than your outer effort. When you try to force outcomes, when you grip tightly with need and desperation, you unknowingly block the very blessings you seek. Like trying to trap a flowing river with your bare hands, the harder you squeeze, the more it slips through. Think back to those moments when you were desperate. You needed answers. You needed love. You needed something to work out. And the more you tried, the more it felt like life was retreating from you. But then something shifted. You got tired. You whispered to yourself, whatever happens, happens. And then like magic, things moved. Doors cracked open. People entered your life. Clarity emerged. It wasn't magic, it was alignment. Because neediness vibrates with fear. And fear tells the universe, I don't believe I have it. I don't believe I ever will. But trust says, I am whole. Whether it comes or not, I'm already complete. That subtle shift between chasing and trusting is what changes everything. Letting go is not the same as giving up. It's stepping aside long enough for life to do what only life can do. When you try to control every twist in the path, you're moving from fear. Fear that things won't work out. Fear that you're not enough. Fear that if you stop hustling, everything will fall apart. But here's the truth: life was never meant to be conquered. It was meant to be danced with. The best things in life, they arrive when you're immersed in the moment, not when you're watching the clock or clinging to plans. Think about it. Your truest friendships weren't forced. They formed when you were simply being yourself. The most transformative opportunities came when you weren't begging for them, but living in a flow that made room for them. And those moments that made you feel most alive, they weren't calculated. They weren't on your to-do list. They just happened. That's because life responds to your energy, not your effort. And your energy is most powerful when it's peaceful, not panicked. When it's grounded, not grasping. When it's trusting, not terrified. In that space of trust, alignment happens. You stop chasing and the things that are meant for you start arriving, sometimes in forms you never expected. That's the beauty of flow. It doesn't always look like your plan. It looks like grace. And here's something almost no one tells you. The more you chase certainty, the more you stir chaos. Why? Because demanding answers and outcomes immediately closes you off to paths your conscious mind hasn't even considered. Life has a broader perspective than your vision. It weaves opportunities, meetings, and divine timing in ways you can't calculate. But if you're fixated on one outcome, you'll miss the better one knocking softly at your door. You know that feeling when something falls apart and you think, this is the worst thing that could happen, only to realize months later it was the best thing that ever happened for you. That's not coincidence. That's life clearing the path. That's trust in action. The more you surrender your grip on how and when something should happen, the more room you give life to deliver something richer, deeper, and more aligned. Trust is not passive. It is the boldest move you can make. It says, I'm showing up fully, but I'm not chaining myself to an outcome. It's about moving forward with open hands, not dragging behind a bag of expectations. And you'll start to notice people are drawn to you differently when you trust. You're not emitting desperate energy. You're not trying to convince, control, or cling. You simply are. And that authenticity, that groundedness, it's magnetic. Everything you're striving to control, every relationship, every outcome, every future scenario is more likely to align not when you demand it, but when you trust it. Because trust creates the space for grace, and grace never forces, it flows. But we weren't taught to trust. We were trained to fear, conditioned from childhood to prepare for worst-case scenarios, to brace for disappointment, to protect ourselves from getting hurt. So of course, trust feels unnatural, risky, like standing on the edge of a cliff with no safety net. Here's the secret, though: you were always on that cliff. Life was never safe. All your plans, your micromanaging, your stress that wasn't control. That was the illusion of control. Real strength isn't found in gripping harder, it's found in letting go with wisdom. Learning to trust life doesn't mean you stop dreaming. It means you stop wrestling your dreams into existence. You stop squeezing them until they lose all joy. And you begin to meet them with faith that what's meant for you is not fragile. It won't break if you loosen your grip. It will arrive stronger if you meet it with openness. So ask yourself this: where am I forcing? Where am I gripping so tightly that I'm actually blocking what I desire? Where am I mistaking control for strength? The moment you release that grip, even just a little, you'll feel it. Life starts to shift. Not always dramatically, but deeply. Things begin to move not with resistance, but with rhythm. Not with anxiety, but with ease. Because here's the truth that changes everything. Life doesn't respond to fear. It responds to alignment, to trust, to peace. And when you trust life, life trusts you right back. So breathe, loosen the grip, trust the tide. You're not falling behind, you're flowing into exactly where you're meant to be in the universe. It always meets you where your heart is open. And as we just explored, when you stop gripping so tightly, when you ease into trust and stare at a panic, life begins to flow back to you in surprising, graceful ways. But here's something that rarely gets talked about, and it's a game changer. Most of the struggle you experience in life doesn't stem from doing the wrong things. In fact, many times you're on the right track. The problem is not the what, it's the how. It's the fear behind the action. It's the tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your chest, the whisper in your head that says, if I don't make this work, I'll lose everything. And so you grip harder. You chase faster. You panic when the results don't appear instantly. You question everything. You wonder, am I failing? Am I doing this wrong? When in reality, you're not failing. You're forcing. And life doesn't reward force, it rewards alignment. When you move from fear, you create resistance. But when you move from trust, you create momentum. That's the shift. That's the alchemy. It's not about trying harder. It's about aligning deeper. Think about those people you've met who seem effortlessly magnetic. They're not hustling for attention. They're not chasing validation. They carry a calm confidence, a steady energy that draws others in. Why? Because they trust themselves. They trust their timing. They trust life. There's something undeniably attractive about someone who doesn't need to convince the world of their worth. And here's the secret: you can have that too. You don't need to become more impressive. You don't need to reinvent yourself or achieve some grand status. What you need truly is to become lighter, to shed the weight of needing everything to happen now, to release the pressure of timelines and outcomes. Because here's the truth: the moment you stop trying to micromanage every detail of your journey, life finally has the space to move through you. Imagine a river trying to break through a wall of boulders. The current is strong, it's ready, but the blockage, the tension, the fear, the control prevents the flow. When you start clearing those mental boulders, everything shifts. The river doesn't need to be told where to go. It already knows. It just needs room to flow. The less you panic, the more you open. The less you chase, the more you attract. The less you grip, the more you grow. This isn't about doing less. It's about being different. You begin to show up as a calmer, wiser version of yourself. Not because you forced that evolution, but because you trusted yourself enough to allow it. Here's the paradox that no one really explains: the more you loosen your grip, the stronger your results become. It sounds unfair, doesn't it? You've worked hard, stayed up late, pushed through resistance. You've planned, organized, executed, and still things seem to slip through your fingers. But the moment you relax, even just a little, things start to land in your lap. Why? Because energy doesn't lie. Desperation has a scent. Even when you smile, even when you say all the right words, people feel it. That please let this work energy repels rather than attracts. But when you're rooted in trust, when you're no longer relying on the outcome to prove your worth, everything changes. You speak differently. You walk into rooms differently. You radiate a frequency that says, I'm not here to beg. I'm here to be. You no longer chase outcomes from a place of survival. You choose them from a place of strength. And that shift, it changes everything. Life mirrors your inner state. If you doubt yourself constantly, life will give you more things to doubt. But if you lead with trust, life responds in kind. It opens doors you didn't even know were there. It places people in your path you never could have planned for. It weaves together events and opportunities in ways your logical mind could never orchestrate. It becomes this unspoken agreement between you and the universe. I'll trust you to unfold, and you'll trust me to show up. You no longer wake up gripped by anxiety about your dreams. Instead, you wake up with quiet excitement, knowing that what you desire is already in motion, that it's coming not because you demand it, but because you're aligned with it. You carry yourself with a lightness. You breathe easier. You walk taller, not from pride, but from peace. And this is where the true shift happens. You become magnetic, not by chasing, but by becoming. You step into the version of you who already belongs to that life you dream of. And in doing so, you draw it closer, not with force, but with flow. Real trust looks like this. You believe that delays are divine timing, that closed doors are redirections, that what is for you is already making its way to you, even if you can't see it yet. That's the hidden power most people never tap into. They keep hustling, controlling, stressing, believing that trust is a risk. But in reality, trust is the shortcut they've been searching for all along. And here's what begins to happen when you trust life. You stop forcing timelines that aren't even meant for you. You let go of the obsession with speed. Because what's the point of getting there fast if it's not where you're meant to be? When you let life take shape naturally without your ego constantly steering the wheel, something beautiful unfolds. What you force often breaks. What you trust often builds itself stronger, deeper, more resilient than anything you could have crafted. Think about the biggest blessings in your life, the friendships, the opportunities, the turning points. They rarely showed up on your deadline, did they? They came in their own time through paths you didn't expect. A conversation you almost skipped, a person you met by accident, a door that opened after you had given up knocking. That's what happens when you stop screaming, "Where is it?" and start whispering, "I'm ready whenever you are." Because there is a rhythm to your life far wiser than the pressure you feel. When you trust that rhythm, you stop interrupting your blessings. You stop rushing into things that aren't for you. You stop shrinking in the face of detours. You let life surprise you, and those around you, they notice. They see you walking with calm, speaking with purpose, radiating a peace they can't quite explain. They ask what changed, and you'll know it wasn't luck, it wasn't magic, it was trust. The kind of trust that says, I don't chase, I align. I don't demand, I prepare. And life in its quiet brilliance meets you exactly there. So after all this, what happens when you stop forcing and start trusting? You don't panic, you receive. That's the shift. That's the moment when life stops feeling like a battlefield and begins to feel like a beautiful unfolding conversation. And finally, you're still enough to listen. Here's the quiet truth that reveals itself once you really lean into trust. You're not missing out. You're not falling behind. You're not losing time. You're simply choosing to breathe deeply in a world that's constantly gasping for the next big thing. Take a look around. Most people are chasing everything that sparkles. Every shiny offer, every moment of validation, every fleeting hit of dopamine. But here's the secret: real opportunities don't scream for your attention. They whisper. They arrive softly, subtly when your mind is clear, when your energy is calm, when your hands are not already clinging to five other things in fear. Trusting life doesn't mean you sit back and wait. It means you live differently. You move through your days with a grounded presence, with a peace that's more powerful than any panic. You become someone who attracts not because you're desperate to receive, but because you've created space for what's meant to arrive. And it always begins with small, almost imperceptible shifts. The call you stopped obsessing over. It comes through. The opportunity you once begged for. A better one lands in your lap when you're no longer gripping tightly. That connection you thought was lost forever. It reappears stronger, clearer, more aligned than ever. Life has a way of rewarding those who walk with open hands. Not fists, not force, just quiet confidence, calm readiness. It's almost ironic: the less you push, the faster life unfolds. The less you obsess, the more naturally things align. It's not about giving up, it's about giving space. When you're no longer anchored in fear, you move differently, you speak differently, you radiate a softness, a steadiness that's rare and magnetic. It draws in the right people, the right moments, the right timing, not because you demanded it, but because you invited it. That's what sets apart those who've truly evolved. You can see it in them. They carry a peace that doesn't need to prove anything. They're not racing for worth. They're not auditioning for life. They're simply living rooted in the belief that what's theirs is already on the way. And you can live this way too. That energy, that calmness, that magnetic presence, it's available to you starting right now. If you're tired of chasing, if you're exhausted from trying to force what isn't yours to force, if you're ready to live with more power and less pressure, then this is your turning point. It begins with one decision. Choose trust. Choose calm alignment over chaotic chasing. Choose the belief that life isn't punishing you. It's preparing something better than what you imagined. And if this resonates, if you feel that something in you is ready to shift, type the word align in the comments. Let's see how many of us are choosing a different kind of power together. Quiet, certain, aligned, because your next chapter. It doesn't begin with more striving. It begins with more surrender. Not the passive kind, but the empowered kind. The kind that says, I'm ready. The kind that stops screaming for answers and starts whispering, I'm going to let it come. You are not meant to chase your future. You're meant to become the version of you who matches it. And that begins not by doing more, but by trusting more. So breathe. You're not falling behind. You're falling into place. Let life meet you there.